Hi, I'm Emily Winters. Thank you for being here. 3 years ago, I stood soaking wet in my parents' marble, foyer begging them to help save my daughter's life. She had 48 hours. They had the money, but they said no. Why? Because my brother's engagement party was more important. They spent $250,000 on a wedding. They couldn't spare $1 to save their granddaughter. So I walked out, and I built everything from the ashes they left me in. Now, they've lost the mansion, the business, the reputation, and they came back asking for help. And I gave them exactly what they asked for, but not what they wanted. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when the person they underestimated is the one holding the pen in the end. Wait, before we go any further, where are you watching from? It was Thanksgiving weekend, and the rain had been falling for hours thick, determined, indifferent. The kind of rain that makes you question every step you've taken to arrive at that moment. I didn't stop. I didn't hesitate. I drove through it with both hands clenched around the steering wheel and my daughter's name on repeat in my chest like prayer. When my parents' house finally came into view, it looked exactly the same as it always had. Tudor-style brick, 4 chimneys, hedges trimmed too precisely to suggest warmth. The house sat still in the mist, unbothered by time, unbothered by who stood outside it, soaked through and shivering. I didn't knock. I used the code. The door clicked open, and I stepped into light. The chandelier struck me first too bright, too clean. It caught the moisture in my hair and made me blink like I was under interrogation. Beneath me, polished marble gleamed like ice, and for a moment, I didn't move. I could hear classical music, Vivaldi, I think, and the pop of champagne corks. Laughter drifted from the main room. Elegant, detached, practiced. My eyes burned. I smelled jasmine and expensive wine. I smelled everything but home. My mother was near the French doors, smiling for a group of her friends. Her pearl earrings caught the chandelier light. She saw me before anyone else did. Her mouth didn't drop open. Her body didn't jolt. She simply stopped smiling like a flame snuffed out behind glass and made her way toward me with that familiar glide. Not rushing, not urgent, just controlled. "Emily," she whispered, gripping my elbow, her voice low but sharp. "Not now. We have guests." "I need to talk to you," I said, privately. Her eyes ran down my coat, soaked and clinging. I watched her nose wrinkle. She nodded once and led me away. My father joined us in the hallway without a word. The three of us moved past the fireplace, the baby grand, the buffet of imported cheeses. No one followed. They never did when it was me. The study door closed behind us, dull and final. I stood there, dripping water on the Persian rug. My mother watched the droplets fall as if they were offensive. My father said nothing, his arms crossed tight. "Zoe collapsed at school," I said. "She's at Portland Memorial." He shifted. "Is she all right?" "No," I whispered. "They found a congenital heart defect. She needs surgery within 48 hours. I swallowed hard. The doctor said, "Without it?" My mother's fingers moved to her necklace. "Surely your insurance." "I don't have it. I was going to enroll next month, once the new client payment cleared, but right now, I have nothing." My father's jaw tensed. "How much?" "63,000. Neither of them moved. "I've tried everything," I said. "The hospital plan only covers a portion. The bank won't approve a loan. They want collateral." I didn't want to cry in front of them. I didn't want to break. But I did. I dropped to my knees in that damn rug they bought from Italy and I begged. "I've never asked you for anything," I said. "Not when Mark was laid off. Not when our roof caved in. Not when I started my business. But this is Zoe. She's 6. She's your granddaughter. Please help us save her." They looked at each other. That silent exchange I'd seen all my life, a language only they spoke. One blink, one purse of lips, one decision already made. My mother exhaled slowly, smoothed her silk skirt. "We simply can't, Emily. Blake's wedding is in 3 weeks. We've already committed. What could possibly cost?" A voice from the doorway. Always so dramatic. "Blake." in a suit tailored too tightly, champagne flute dangling from his fingers, his fiancée hovering behind him like she wasn't sure if she was supposed to smile or stay silent. "Not now, Blake," I said. But my father spoke over me. "We've put down deposits for the venue, catering, honeymoon, 250,000, non-refundable." I blinked. "You're telling me you can't save Zoe because you already saved Blake's date." "Maybe you should have planned better," my mother said softly. She adjusted the bracelet on her wrist, the sapphire one, the one she once told me I'd inherit if I ever settled down. "There are consequences to poor financial decisions." I stared at them. These people who had kissed her cheek at the hospital the day she was born, who sent a stuffed bear for her first Christmas, who framed her kindergarten drawing for exactly 1 week, then took it down when the new family portrait arrived. "My daughter might die," I said, "and you're worried about a party." Blake chuckled. "Get better insurance next time. Some of us plan for the future." I walked to my mother, gently took her wrist, unclasped the sapphire bracelet, placed it in her hand. "Take this back," I said. "I'll find another way." My father's voice cracked for the first time. "Emily, be reasonable." I looked at him. "I've never been more reasonable." I walked out, through the foyer, past the orchestra quartet, past the guests who paused to watch me pass, murmuring things they thought I wouldn't hear. That must be the older daughter, the one who left, the troubled one. The rain had stopped. The air outside smelled clean, honest. My phone buzzed as I reached the car. A message from Mark. "Any luck?" I stared up at the windows where people toasted Crystal and praised themselves for being a family. Zoe's voice echoed in my mind. "Grandma and Grandpa have the biggest house ever. Do they love us big too?" I typed my reply. "Number, but we'll save her anyway. And I will never knock on that door again." I didn't cry on the drive back. Not because I wasn't broken, but because something colder had settled in. The kind of cold that doesn't leave space for tears. It was in my throat, my chest, the tips of my fingers gripping the wheel too tightly. Mark didn't ask what happened when I stepped inside. He just looked at me. Then at the wet coat I didn't bother removing. Then past me, to the kitchen table where Zoe's crayon drawing still lay 5 stick figures holding hands, one with blonde curls like hers, one labeled Grandma, one Grandpa. I took it and folded it once, carefully, and slid it into the drawer beneath the toaster. That night I couldn't sleep. Neither could Mark. We lay side by side, backs touching, staring at the ceiling as if the answers would be carved there in the drywall. At 2 in the morning, I rose and paced the hallway, whispering numbers to myself. Bank balance, hospital invoice, deadline, 46 hours left. I called the loan officer again, left another voicemail. My voice sounded foreign, tight, desperate but contained. No one called back. In the morning, Mark drove to Johnson's place. The Mustang was gone by noon. He placed the check on the table like it was a wound he didn't want to reopen. 8,000, he said. The car was worth more, but Johnson knew we were desperate. I stared at it for a long time. That car wasn't just metal, it was memory. His father had given it to him when he turned 16. He spent 3 summers under that hood, covered in grease, talking to Zoe while she sat on a crate with her coloring books. It was his last piece of something untouched by failure, and he sold it without flinching. "You loved that car," I whispered. He took my hand. "I love Zoe more." We added it to the pile, our savings account, his early withdrawal from the retirement fund. A credit card pushed to its edge. The Mustang money, still short by 23,000. I called the hospital billing department. They offered sympathy and a pamphlet. I called 3 churches, left messages. No one called back. The lines between humiliation and responsibility blurred. I called my old college roommate. She sent 500, apologized for not being able to do more. Mark's coworker left a check in our mailbox. People tried. But kindness is not a currency hospitals accept. By midnight, the refrigerator buzzed louder than usual. I sat beside it on the floor, back against the cool metal. Above me, Zoe's drawings fluttered under the magnet-smiling suns, crooked hearts, a house with smoke curling from the chimney. Her handwriting, still learning itself, scrawled across the latest one. I love Mommy. My chest hurt. At 6:13 in the morning, the doorbell rang. I opened the door with the mortgage rejection letter still stuck to my cheek. Static pulled it loose when I turned the knob. On the porch stood Tom and Denise, Mark's parents. Tom in his worn Carhartt jacket, Denise in her floral blouse and soft eyes. Their presence hit me like warmth after frostbite. We heard, Tom said. Tried to call. Battery died, Mark mumbled from behind me. They came in, Saturday on the edge of our sagging couch like they were afraid to take up too much space. Tom cleared his throat, stared at his cap like it held the words he couldn't say. Denise looked at the photo of Zoe on the mantle-gap tooth smile, strawberry blonde braids. How is she? Denise asked. Stable, I said. For now. Tom nodded once, then said, We sold the cabin. I blinked. The cabin in Montana, their dream, one room in the pines, hand-built by Tom over 2 decades. It was their retirement plan, their peace. It wasn't supposed to be touched. You what? Mark said. His voice was a breath away from breaking. Got a decent price, Tom replied. His voice was low but firm. That cabin was your everything, Mark whispered. Tom didn't flinch. Family is everything. Denise opened her purse, pulled out a thick envelope, and set it on the coffee table. 38,000, she said. I couldn't speak. My hands shook. My mouth opened and closed. Mark knelt beside her. We can't take this. You can, she said, and you will. This is what family does. No fanfare, no guilt, just a decision. Later, at the hospital, we signed the final form. Our own contributions, their envelope. No need for the bank, no need for anyone else. Zoe's surgery began at 10:23. I waited, not with panic, but with something deeper, a stillness that only comes when you've hit the bottom and realize you are still breathing. I clutched her stuffed rabbit, the one she held every night since she was 2. I ran my thumb over the worn ear, threadbare and loved. I thought of my parents, of their wine glasses and white tablecloths, of how my mother adjusted her bracelet as I begged, how my father checked his watch. That night, I didn't cry. I wrote instead. In a journal I kept hidden behind the cleaning supplies, I started recording names, not out of bitterness, but remembrance. Johnson, for buying the Mustang. Laura from HR, for donating paid time off. Denise and Tom, for selling their dream. Each name a thread in the net that caught us. Each kindness, proof that blood may bind, but action builds. That night, I kissed Zoe's forehead as the machines beeped their rhythm. I promised her something. You will never be vulnerable like this again. Not because the world is kind, but because I will make sure of it. Because the people who didn't flinch, who stepped forward when others stepped back, showed me how to build something stronger than hope, something called certainty. I would build a life around her with hands that knew how to catch, with people who chose her. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And I would never ask the wrong people twice. The cabin had always been a dream they spoke of in quiet tones, as if saying it too loudly might make the land vanish. 5 acres of pine in Montana, no electricity the first 2 years, just a wood stove and long evenings of light from kerosene lamps. Tom built it by hand on weekends 12 walls at a time, then the porch, then the loft. Denise painted the cabinets herself, a soft robin's egg blue that never matched anything else but always felt like home. They talked about retiring there, about snowshoeing in winter, canning in summer, reading by the fire with no clocks nearby, a kind of life you earn after years of showing up for everyone but yourself. That was the plan. Until Zoe collapsed on the playground. I don't know how they made the decision, whether they talked about it for hours or just looked at each other and knew. All I know is they arrived at our apartment before sunrise, and when they said the words "we sold the cabin," I felt something shift. Not just in me. In the entire framework of what I thought family meant. I had been taught that blood came first, that family helped family, that love, when real, arrived before the clock ran out. And yet it wasn't my parents who stepped forward. It was Mark's, not with conditions, not with judgment, just a simple truth. Family is who shows up. They didn't hand me the money like it was charity. They didn't make a speech or ask for a thank you. Tom placed the envelope on the table, folded his hands, and stared down at the scuffed linoleum floor like he was apologizing to someone who wasn't in the room. Denise offered coffee. I didn't have the words to respond. My body was still moving on instinct, my mind caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. I remember Mark's voice breaking when he asked why give up the only place they ever wanted to grow old. Tom's answer was quiet, because she's our girl, and because nothing we ever built matters if we lose her. We signed the hospital forms that afternoon. The administrator raised an eyebrow at the payment. No one expects people like us to come through with that kind of money. But we did. We always find a way when the world assumes we'll fall apart. It's a strange kind of power, that clarity, the kind you only get once you've begged and been told no by the people who should have said yes without thinking. My parents never called, not to check, not to ask. I don't know if they even noticed I didn't show up to Blake's engagement dinner, or maybe they did and told themselves I was being dramatic. That was the word they always used for me. Dramatic. As if desperation is theater. Zoe's surgery began at 10:23 in the morning. She held my hand until the anesthesia blurred her eyes. When she finally let go, the stillness was unbearable. Mark and I sat in plastic chairs. Tom and Denise brought food no one ate. 14 hours passed. Machines beeped behind swinging doors. Doctors came and went in blue gowns with tired eyes. I memorized the tile pattern on the floor. I counted each breath, unsure if it was hers or mine. When Dr. Singh walked out and said she made it through, I thought my knees would give out. He said the next 48 hours were critical, that complications were possible, but that she had a chance, a real one. Tom cried then, quietly, into his palms. Denise didn't. She simply placed a hand on my shoulder and held it there like a promise. The days that followed blurred together. Hospital rooms are strange like that. Time folds in on itself. Daylight means very little. Meals arrive and go untouched. You watch monitors instead of clocks. And slowly, life seeps back in. Zoe's fingers twitched. Then her eyes opened. She whispered my name with a cracked voice that sounded like it had traveled across too much pain to get to me. I sat beside her every moment, read books in whispers, sang off-key lullabies, cleaned her IV line even when the nurses told me I didn't have to. Mark took shifts, handling phone calls, paying bills, holding my hand when I needed to, remember I wasn't alone. Denise brought soup in thermoses. Tom snuck in fishing magazines and showed Zoe how to cast an imaginary line from her hospital bed. They didn't hover or demand. They just existed around us like the foundation of something solid. One night, when Zoe finally drifted to sleep without the morphine haze, I stepped into the hallway and called the number on my parents' landline. It rang 6 times. No one picked up. I didn't leave a message. In the silence, I thought about that cabin. I had only been there once, years ago. We'd visited over Labor Day weekend. No reception, no Wi-Fi, just stars and silence and a lake that reflected the moon so clearly it felt like you were falling upward. Denise had made cobbler with wild berries. Tom taught Zoe how to spot deer tracks. She'd called it the magic forest. I remember how they lit up watching her. That was love. Quiet, unwavering, unadorned. I asked Tom once if he missed it. He shrugged. Said the trees would still be there, and that some places aren't meant to be kept, they're meant to be given away when someone else needs the magic more. I wrote that down. Later, after Zoe was moved to recovery, I pulled out the notebook where I had started listing every person who had shown up for us. I wrote Tom and Denise's names at the top. Then I drew a line underneath and wrote in all capital letters, "This is family." That line stayed in my mind for days. through every setback, through every late-night whisper with nurses, through each new scan and test. And when the doctors said she was improving, when they told us we might go home in under 2 weeks, I didn't think of my parents. I thought of the cabin. I thought of the porch swing Tom hung with rope he braided himself. I thought of how easy it is to mistake silence for absence, and how wrong that assumption had always been. Because some people don't raise their voices, they raise you. The day we brought Zoe home, the first thing she asked was if we could go back to the magic forest. I said one day, but I knew the truth. That forest now lived in the way Tom stirred soup on our stove, in the way Denise folded Zoe's clothes with lavender sachets. It lived in the $38,000 placed quietly on a scratched table by two people who never needed to be asked. And even now, years later, when the world tells me to forgive my parents, to remember blood, I return to that image, the cabin in the woods, the one they gave up without hesitation. I remember who built their love out of wood and sacrifice, and I remember who locked theirs behind glass and marble. One gave me shelter, the other gave me silence. And only one of them ever showed up when it mattered. Hospitals teach you patience in the cruelest way. You wait for minutes that feel like hours, hours that stretch across days. You memorize the sound of your child's heart monitor more intimately than her laugh. You learn that sleep is shallow and conditional, that your body, even in collapse, will continue forward because it has to. I lived on coffee I didn't taste and adrenaline I didn't trust. The chair beside Zoe's bed became my second spine. I stopped noticing the ache in my neck or the way my eyes burned. My body belonged to vigilance now. Zoe's chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, the rise sharp, the fall soft. She looked smaller than usual, fragile. Her skin pale against the white sheets, her mouth slightly open beneath the oxygen line. They shaved a small patch of her hair behind the ear to place the monitors. I watched her sleep for hours. I watched her win. They told us the worst was over, but the next few days were critical. Any sign of fever, any irregular heart rhythm. We stayed in shifts. Denise brought casseroles in glass dishes marked with our name in masking tape. Tom learned to fold hospital blankets with military precision. Mark took calls, updated clients, and read the news out loud when the silence felt too loud. I didn't go home. I didn't leave the hospital for more than 20 minutes at a time. I needed to see her breathing. One afternoon, a volunteer stopped by with a stuffed giraffe. Zoe stirred as the nurse placed it beside her. Her eyes fluttered open. Her hand, still bandaged, reached for the toy without lifting it. She didn't speak at first, just looked around the room slowly. Then at me. Her lips moved, dry and cracked. "Mommy," she said, barely more than a breath. I cried for the first time since the night I begged on that marble floor. The doctors called her recovery miraculous. Her body responded to every treatment like it was fighting to come back to us. She gained color in her cheeks, strength in her voice. The scar on her chest, neat and thin now, traced a path from just below her collarbone to the soft ridge of her sternum. A new line on a map I never wanted her to carry. She traced it with her fingers sometimes. Asked if it would always be there. I said yes. And I told her it meant she was stronger than anything that tried to stop her heart. She didn't understand the metaphor. Not yet. But she smiled. That night, I sat in the hallway outside her room. The walls were a pale green meant to soothe. They didn't. I scrolled through my phone out of habit, not intention. Texts I never opened, emails I never answered. Missed calls I stopped counting. A voicemail sat at the top of the screen. My mother's number. I stared at it without playing it. I could already hear her voice in my head, calm and clipped. I hope she's better. I hope this isn't more drama. I hope you understand how much you've put us through. I deleted it without listening. In the days that followed, we fell into a rhythm. Morning vitals, afternoon walks around the ward, evening stories whispered in the dark. Zoe liked it when I sang, even though I never could. Tom brought a portable speaker and played classical music low enough not to disturb the nurses. Denise brushed Zoe's hair with slow, careful strokes. Her hands always knew exactly how much pressure to use, how to untangle without pulling. One morning, as I adjusted Zoe's pillow, she touched my arm. "Mommy," she said, "why didn't Grandma Monica visit?" I didn't answer right away. I just smoothed the sheets and pretended not to hear. She asked again the next day, and the next. By the end of the week, she had stopped asking. Children don't need long explanations. They feel what we try to hide. They learn to make peace with absence before they learn to spell it. In the quiet hours between vital checks, I wrote, at first it was just lists, medications, observations, foods. She tolerated. But slowly, I began keeping a journal again, not the one hidden in the kitchen, a new one, clean pages, blue cover. I titled it Zoe's Life Lessons. I wrote down everything she survived, everything she asked, everything I promised. I wrote down the names of everyone who showed up. I wrote, Tom carried her in his arms from the recovery wing to the elevator because she was afraid of the wheelchair. I wrote, Denise cried when Zoe stood for the first time. I wrote, Mark hasn't slept more than 4 hours in a week but still brings coffee to my bedside. I did not write my parents' names. Not because I was angry, but because they had become irrelevant to the story. When the nurse finally said the word discharge, I felt lightheaded. We packed in silence, gathered her toys, her coloring books, her small socks with the animals on the heels. Mark carried the bags. Denise folded the extra blanket we brought from home. Tom wheeled her to the exit. I watched them, this unlikely team of survivors, and knew the shape of our family had changed forever. Outside, the air smelled like spring. We brought Zoe home to a banner drawn by neighborhood kids, balloons taped to our front door, groceries stocked by friends, a meal train scheduled through a community app I never downloaded. Kindness multiplied while I wasn't looking. Zoe's scar was still healing. She winced when lifting her arms. She tired easily, but her eyes were bright, her voice steady. She sat at the table that first night back, spooning soup into her mouth like nothing had changed. And maybe to her, nothing had. She had always been loved. The cast of characters had simply shifted. I watched her sleep that night. The scar on her chest glinted slightly under the moonlight streaming through the blinds. A pale line, a wound, and a reminder, a trail of survival, a boundary I would never allow to be crossed again. The next morning I pulled out the hospital invoice, still folded in the side pocket of my bag. I read every line, not for the numbers, but for what they meant. Then I folded it again and placed it in a file labeled Family, because sometimes survival isn't just about the heart that keeps beating. Sometimes it's about remembering exactly who let it almost stop, and never giving them the chance to do it again. The kitchen table was never meant to hold anything but meals and messes. Spaghetti sauce, school permission slips, paper towels soaked in grape juice. But after the hospital, it became something else. A workspace, a war room, a quiet altar to the life we were rebuilding. It was scratched and wobbly, the varnish worn thin from years of elbows and homework. But it held, just like we did. We were back home, but nothing felt stable yet. Zoe was healing, yes. The scar on her chest softened each day, pale pink and no longer angry. But beneath that, there was still fragility. I saw it in the way she slept, clutching her stuffed giraffe like a lifeline, in the way she flinched slightly at the sound of the microwave beeping. I knew that recovery wasn't only physical. Not for her. Not for me. We were 2 months behind on rent. The electric bill carried a red warning stripe. Mark had gone back to work part-time, but his shifts were unpredictable. Most nights, he came home smelling like coffee grounds and fried food. I took meetings over Zoom in my sweatshirt, hair tied back, always careful to angle the camera away from the clutter. Clients didn't need to see the unpaid bills taped to the fridge. But I worked. I worked like I was trying to outrun a fire. At that kitchen table, I designed interiors for people who had never lost anything. People who wanted their summer homes to look like Tuscany, their nurseries to feel like Paris, their conference rooms to smell like success. I built visions for their dreams while holding the pieces of my own together with binder clips and late-night prayers. And then came the Westbrook Hotel's pitch. 7 boutique hotels along the coast, all undergoing renovation under new ownership. They were looking for a fresh voice, someone who understood intimacy without pretense, a designer who could bring emotion into commercial space. The contract was valued at nearly $2 million. I didn't have an office. I didn't have a staff. What I had was an idea. I stayed up for 3 nights straight working on the concept boards. Mark took Zoe on walks during daylight so I could nap in bursts. Denise delivered food with labels and soft reminders to eat. Tom built Zoe a small easel so she could draw beside me. They orbited me without expectation. Their presence, the structure I lacked. The morning of the pitch, I wore a blazer I hadn't touched in years. It still smelled faintly of ambition. The conference room was all glass and chrome, the kind of space designed to make you feel small. I walked in holding foam boards and a portfolio held together with rubber bands. The other firms were already seated, flawless presentations displayed on matching iPads. The CEO, a tall man with sharp features and an expensive watch, raised an eyebrow when he saw me. "Miss Winters," he said, flipping through my folder, "your firm is considerably smaller than the others were considering." "Oh, I am the firm," I said. He paused. "You don't have a team?" "Not yet." There was silence. Then polite nods. The kind that say thank you for coming, but we've already made up our minds. I began anyway. I told them hotels weren't just places to sleep. They were where people came to grieve, to celebrate, to escape. I told them the difference between a good stay and an unforgettable one wasn't the view or the thread count, it was whether a space made you feel seen. I showed them plans for reading nooks built into bay windows, child-friendly suites with adjustable light for bedtime routines, front desks designed at a height comfortable for wheelchair users and toddlers alike. They were polite, mildly impressed, but I could feel the wall. I knew they didn't see me as a contender, so I showed them the last piece in my folder. Before and after photos of Tom and Denise's new home. I told them the truth. That cabin was supposed to be their retirement dream, I said. They sold it to save my daughter's life. After the surgery, I redesigned their new house, not as a replacement, as a thank you. Every detail honors who they are. A kitchen built around Denise's pie tins, a window seat angled for Tom's birdwatching, a mudroom because Tom still wears boots, even in summer. I paused, let the room breathe. That's what I do. I build spaces that remember the people inside them. The CEO leaned forward slightly. "Why do you deserve this contract, Miss Winters?" I looked at him, really looked. "Because I know what matters," I said. "And it's not marble floors or imported wallpaper. It's knowing that sometimes the smallest detail can remind someone they're home." 3 days later, I was back at the kitchen table when the email came. "Westbrook Hotels is pleased to inform you." I dropped the phone. Mark caught it, read the message, and let out a sound that was half laugh, half disbelief. He picked me up and spun me around in the kitchen, his arms wrapped tight as if letting go might undo the moment. Zoe danced around us, clapping, not understanding the full weight but feeling the shift. We celebrated with pancakes, burnt ones. Zoe insisted on flipping them herself. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The same spot where I had once cried over an unpaid invoice. The same surface where Mark had placed the Mustang check. Where Denise had left a thermos of soup. Where I had pressed my forehead down and whispered, "I don't know how we'll survive this." And now, here I was, signing the biggest contract of my career, still surrounded by unpaid bills, still carrying the weight of betrayal, but with one undeniable truth carved into the grain of that table. We built this from nothing, with new inheritance, new investors, new safety net. Just grit, grace, and a child who survived. I opened my journal and wrote one sentence. This table is where we saved her, and where I started saving myself. The morning of Zoe's 7th birthday started quietly, the way all good days do. She woke before the sun, tiptoed into our room, and whispered into my ear that she was officially older. Her breath smelled like strawberries and sleet. I pulled her close, kissed her forehead, and told her that made her nearly ancient. She giggled and ran off to find her party dress. The pink one Denise had sewn herself with little white stars on the sleeves. That year, we didn't have much, but we had enough. Enough to bake cupcakes from scratch. Enough to tape crepe paper to the living room ceiling until it drooped in waves of soft color. Enough to invite 6 kids from school, plus their siblings. And most importantly, enough to throw the party in a space that was finally ours. My office. Not a kitchen table anymore. A real space. With walls painted warm ivory and framed sketches hung in even rows. The Winters Design Studio logo printed on the glass door made everything feel official, though I still unlocked it each morning with a strange sense of disbelief. Inside were 3 desks, 2 interns, and a small waiting area filled with catalogs and potted plants we kept miraculously alive. I leased the space 2 months after landing the Westbrook contract. A modest storefront in an older part of town, but filled with light and promise. My first act after signing the lease was to install a play corner-run beanbag, a bookshelf, and a small table with marker so Zoe would always feel welcome. I told her she was the real CEO. She didn't disagree. Denise and Tom arrived early for the party, carrying pots of chili and a cooler of juice boxes. Mark stayed behind to finish decorating at home, where we planned a second surprise after the party. The night before, he had spent hours assembling a used bicycle we bought from a neighbor, carefully wrapping it in sparkly ribbon. Zoe spent the morning twirling through the office in her star dress, inspecting the decorations, asking every few minutes if it was time yet. When the first guests arrived, she stood at the door like a hostess, offering gummy bears in paper cups. Tom wore a party hat. Denise organized games with the other moms. The place filled with laughter, frosting, the sound of balloons rubbing against walls, and the occasional shriek of pure joy. No one from my side of the family came. They hadn't been invited. Zoe didn't ask. She no longer drew them in her pictures. Later that afternoon, while Zoe played tag in the lot behind the building with her friends, I stood by the office window and watched her. Her arms were strong again. Her laughter, full. The scar on her chest, a faint mark beneath her dress, no longer defined her. It was part of her, yes, but not the whole. She had healed in layers through love, repetition, and the presence of people who never flinched. Mark came up behind me, holding 2 cups of lemonade. He offered me one and tapped the window with his knuckle. "She's fast again," he said. I nodded. Stronger than ever. I was speaking of more than her body. We took the long way home, driving through our old neighborhood and then the new development where we had put in an application. The office had started to turn profit. Small at first, enough to cover overhead, then enough to pay myself a salary. 2 more clients had signed contracts. One of them asked if I could design their vacation home, the kind of job I used to dream about. By the time we reached home, the sun was low, and the second surprise was ready. When Zoe saw the bicycle, she froze. Her hands covered her mouth. Then she whispered, "Is it really mine?" Tom nodded. He had tied a bell to the handlebars. She rode in circles in the driveway until the sky turned lavender and the streetlights blinked on. When Mark called her in for dinner, she parked the bike carefully against the porch. Not a scratch on it. That night, after the cake and the stories, after the gifts had been unwrapped and thank you cards half written, I tucked Zoe into bed. She pulled the blankets up to her chin and asked me the question I had secretly feared. "Why don't Grandma Monica and Grandpa Gerald come to my birthday anymore?" I hesitated, my fingers brushing her hair back behind her ear. "Sometimes," I said, "people don't know how to show love the right way, and sometimes they choose other things over the people who need them most." Zoe stared at the ceiling for a moment, thinking. "But Grandma Denise and Grandpa Tom never leave." "No," I said, "they don't." She turned her head, eyes closing. Then, I like my grandparents better now. When I went back into the kitchen, Mark was cleaning up. He slid an envelope toward me without a word. Inside was a letter from the Westbrook executive team thanking me again for the vision I had brought to their properties. Alongside it, a check, the second installment of the contract double what the first had been. I looked at Mark. Is this real? He smiled, pulled me into a hug. You built it, Em. All of it. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed at the dining table with my laptop, running numbers, comparing properties, imagining a second location, maybe Seattle, maybe somewhere quieter. I started a spreadsheet called Expansion. I saved it twice. At 2 in the morning, I opened Zoe's life journal and wrote another entry. 7 years old. Alive, happy, strong. She had made it. And so had I. Not because I had money, not because I had revenge, but because I had built something no one could take from us. I looked around the house. It was still small, still cluttered, but filled with proof. Sketches on the walls, soup in the fridge, a child in the next room dreaming safely. And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't just a birthday. It was the founding day of something real. Not a company, an empire. One built on survival, sacrifice, and the kind of love that doesn't ask to be thanked. Just trusted. Just shown up. Over and over again. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. A journalist from a regional business magazine wanted to feature Winter's design studio for their upcoming issue on women entrepreneurs. I nearly declined. I wasn't interested in public recognition, in headlines or photo shoots, but something in her voice, earnest, calm, curious, without pretense, made me pause. She said she admired how I had built the company without traditional backing, how I had prioritized healthcare benefits, how I had become known quietly for hiring single parents and paying them fairly. She wanted to understand why. I said yes. The interview took place in my new office, a larger space we moved into 2 months earlier. More staff, a receptionist now, plants that lived longer, a break room with an espresso machine I still hadn't figured out. The journalist arrived early. She wore flat shoes and carried a leather-bound notebook. She didn't ask about profit margins. She asked about Zoe. I didn't offer much at first, just that she had been sick once and that it had changed everything. But then she asked about the core of the business. What made me choose healthcare over bigger margins? What made me choose flexibility for employees instead of hard profit? I hesitated. Then I told her the story. Not all of it, just the part that mattered. I told her about the night I asked my parents for help, and they said no. I told her how my in-laws sold their only retirement plan to save my daughter. I told her how no one came from my side of the family, not even once, while Zoe fought to live. And how, in the quiet that followed, I had rebuilt everything from scratch with the people who stayed. She asked if I wanted to keep the details off the record. I said no. The article was published 2 weeks later, with a photograph of me standing beside Zoe in front of the office. Her face lit up in the golden hour sun, mine calm and unsmiling. The headline read, "Rising from the Ashes, How Tragedy Sparked a Design Revolution." I didn't expect what came next. The story was shared nearly 40,000 times in the first 3 days. It was picked up by larger outlets, business newsletters, health blogs. Even a parenting podcast quoted one of my lines in their intro. I hadn't realized how hungry people were to see truth said plainly, not wrapped in apology, not softened with disclaimers, just said, "My own parents let my daughter suffer." That's when I realized blood doesn't define family. It was that sentence that cut deepest and loudest. Calls began flooding the office, not just from clients, but from other parents, from strangers, from people I didn't know but who had lived pieces of my story in silence. They wrote things like, "Thank you for saying what I never could," or, "Now I understand why I stopped trying to be enough for the people who were never enough for me." Zoe asked why her picture was everywhere. I told her stories help people feel brave. She nodded, satisfied. At 9 years old, She understood more about courage than most adults. Then came the fallout. My brother Blake texted me. 2 words. Really, Emily? Then another. Mom wants to know if Zoe survived. Also, you're causing drama. I didn't reply. Next came a voicemail from my father, his voice slow, strained, still holding the remnants of performance. Your actions reflect poorly on this family's reputation, he said. This should have stayed private. And I deleted the message without listening to the rest. A week later, I received a cream-colored envelope in the mail-in invitation to Blake's wedding anniversary gala, addressed only to me. No mention of Mark, no mention of Zoe. I didn't respond. I placed the envelope in a drawer and closed it, not out of anger, but finality. Then I heard from an old acquaintance, Elaine Withers, a woman who sat on a nonprofit board with my mother. She called me directly, her voice low and deliberate. I don't know if I should tell you this, she said, but they didn't show up to the spring fundraiser, claimed they had another engagement. But someone saw them pull into the parking lot, sit there for 20 minutes, and then drive away. I said nothing. She continued. Word is their business is in trouble, lost 3 major accounts. People don't want to be associated with that kind of coldness. They read your story. I thanked her, hung up, and sat for a long time staring at my screen. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished. As if a door that had always been cracked just in case had finally shut. Not slammed, just closed. Quietly, decisively. The following week, Mark's cousin called. She worked at Blake's firm. He didn't get the promotion, she said, almost whispering. Apparently his boss read the article, questioned his character and judgment. Blake said you sabotaged him. I looked around the Office 16 employees now. A wall of awards for our healthcare facility designs. A framed mission statement about creating spaces that heal. Nothing here was built on vengeance. All of it came from what they left behind when they said no. The wreckage they thought I wouldn't survive became the ground I built on. By summer, we opened new locations in Denver and San Diego. Our first fundraiser raised enough to sponsor 12 heart surgeries for children without insurance. Tom gave a speech. Denise took photos. Zoe helped hand out cupcakes. We didn't mention the past. We just lived the result of having moved forward without it. In one interview, a reporter asked if I regretted saying my parents' names out loud. No, I said. I regret ever protecting them with my silence. Later that evening, I watched Zoe sleep, her breathing even, the nightlight casting soft shadows across the wall. Her chest, once opened by strangers in a race against time, now rising and falling without struggle. She was alive because people showed up, and because I learned, too late but not too late, that loyalty doesn't mean letting someone harm you twice. That night, I wrote a new line in her journal. The truth will always echo louder than silence, especially when it's no longer afraid to be heard. The voicemail came late, nearly midnight, as the rain tapped gently against my kitchen windows. I didn't need to check who it was. I recognized the voice before it even fully formed. My father breathing heavily, like he was bracing himself for what he was about to say. Emily, please. We have nowhere else to turn. There was no performance in his voice this time, no polished inflection or boardroom confidence, just a man with too much pride left behind in the ruins of a house that was no longer his. I let the message play twice, then set the phone face down on the counter. For months they had tried silence, as if my story, shared in a magazine and echoed in thousands of comments, could be ignored back into nothing. But the internet has a long memory, and shame moves faster than apology. Their business had lost its final account. The mansion had been listed below market value and then pulled when the bank intervened. Blake's company quietly reassigned him after the promotion scandal. His wife had filed for separation. I hadn't spoken to her since the day she sent a handwritten note thanking me for giving her the courage to leave. Now, they wanted help. From the daughter they erased. My assistant buzzed the next morning to say they had arrived. I told her to send them in. They walked into my office slowly, like visitors in a museum of someone else's success. My mother's makeup was too thick, hiding what time had done to her face. Her handbag wasn't real leather. My father's suit was the same one he wore to my high school graduation. It no longer fit. "Emily," he said, with the voice he once used to close six-figure deals, "you've done very well." My mother nodded quickly. The article, it was powerful. I gestured toward the seats across from my desk. They sat in unison, the choreography of desperation written in every motion. "We're not here to bring up the past," my father said, leaning forward. We're in a difficult place." "The bank." "I know," I said. He cleared his throat. "We need 120,000 to stop the foreclosure." My mother added, almost pleading, "The furniture store didn't survive the online shift. Everyone's shopping digital now. We didn't pivot fast enough." I said nothing. "You're our daughter," my father continued, faltering. "Family should come together when it matters." He had no idea what those words meant to me now. I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out my phone, tapped the screen. The recording played, loud and sharp in the quiet office. His voice filled the room. "Your irresponsible financial decisions aren't our problem. Blake manages his money properly. Perhaps you should take notes instead of asking for handouts. It reflects poorly on this family's reputation." The clip ended. Silence followed. My mother looked down. My father stared at the floor. "Did either of you visit Zoe in the hospital?" I asked. No answer. "Did you send flowers? A message? A stuffed animal from the gift shop downstairs?" Nothing. I stood, my hands flat against the desk. Mark's parents sold their cabin to save her. Tom sat through 14 hours of surgery without once leaving the waiting room. Denise learned how to change her dressings and read her charts. They showed up. Tears slid down my mother's face. My father's jaw tightened, as if holding in something he couldn't swallow. I reached down and lifted the black leather suitcase from beneath the desk, placed it squarely between us. It was pristine, sleek, heavy with what it held inside. "Take it," I said. My father's hand trembled as he undid the latches. Inside, stacks of crisp bills, exactly 120,000. "Not a penny more," I added. "Not a penny less." They looked at me, confused. My mother whispered, "This means you forgive us." I shook my head slowly. "Number, this isn't forgiveness. It's severance." My father's brows furrowed. "We don't understand." "You don't have to," I said. "Just know this is the last transaction we'll ever have. From this moment on, I'm no longer your daughter." They didn't speak. My father closed the suitcase, still stunned. My mother looked like she might say something, but whatever words she had dissolved before they left her lips. They stood slowly, walked toward the door with the weight of shame more visible than the suitcase in his hand. When the doors closed behind them, I remained standing. The sunlight had shifted across the room, catching the corner of Zoe's kindergarten photo on my shelfer-toothy grin, arms wrapped around Tom's neck. Beside it, a frame holding the final receipt from the hospital. I had kept it, not for the number, but as a reminder that we paid it without their help. With love, not inheritance. With community, not convenience. That night, I told Mark what happened. He didn't ask why I gave them the money. He simply nodded and said, "Because you needed the chapter closed." Exactly. It wasn't about generosity. It wasn't about guilt. It was about clarity. The kind that only comes when you've outgrown your begging voice and found your boundary instead. Later, as Zoe practiced her piano in the next room, I opened her journal and added a new entry. Sometimes the greatest power isn't in slamming the door. It's in quietly locking it behind you and throwing away the key. The backyard wasn't large, but it was enough. A modest patch of grass bordered by white azaleas, 2 young maples that Tom planted himself, and a weathered wooden fence that Mark and I repainted that spring. The swing set had come secondhand from a neighbor down the street, and the picnic table was the same one Denise had used at the old cabin, paint-chipped, but still sturdy. We didn't need more. This was the place Zoe loved best, and in that backyard, on an ordinary Saturday afternoon, she stood beneath the yellow sky with a treasure map in hand and a grin wide enough to crack open the day. Denise had drawn the map herself. Each X was marked with intention. Behind the tulips, under the blue chair, next to the bird feeder where Tom had carved Zoe's landing in crooked letters. There were 6 clues in total, each leading to a small box filled with simple thing stickers, beads, hand-drawn coupons for extra bedtime stories or one no veggies dinner. At the final spot, buried shallow beneath the herb garden, was a wooden chest Tom had built in the garage, painted purple and gold. Inside, a new sketchbook, a pack of glitter pens, and a note written in Denise's neat cursive, "You are braver than any map can show." Zoe squealed when she opened it. She ran across the yard barefoot, arms full of her treasure, and flung herself into Tom's lap. He let out a theatrical oof and kissed the top of her head. Denise watched from the porch, snapping photos on a camera she insisted was too old but never failed to capture the exact moment that mattered. From the kitchen window, I saw them, all the family that showed up, not because they had to, but because they always had. I stood for a long moment, letting the sight settle into my chest like a stone sinking to the bottom of still water. Quiet and heavy, but not painful. Just honest. Mark appeared beside me with 2 mugs of coffee. "She's never going to stop talking about this treasure hunt," he said. "She's not supposed to," I replied. "That's the point." End quote. We sat on the porch steps, watching the yard become more than grass and trees. It had become memory, foundation, proof. The scar on Zoe's chest had faded to a faint line now, only visible when she wore certain tops, but it never stopped existing. Just like everything that came before, the hospital, the begging, the betrayal, and the choice to never go back. After a while, Zoe plopped down beside us, sweaty and red-cheeked. She handed me the final clue, the one she had found last. I unfolded it. In Denise's handwriting was the phrase, "Family is who hides the treasure and then helps you find it." I smiled, kissed her forehead, and tucked the clue into my pocket like it was something holy. Later that evening, after the sun had melted behind the rooftops and dinner had been eaten under string lights that Tom hung himself, we gathered around the fire pit. Zoe played the small keyboard we kept outside on warm nights. Her fingers stumbled here and there, but no one corrected her. She played a song she wrote herself, mostly high notes and soft chords. She called it the Heart Song, and we all listened like it was Mozart. When she finished, she turned to Tom and said, "You're the best grandpa in the world." He chuckled. "Only because I have the best girl." Denise leaned over to whisper something in her ear, and Zoe burst into laughter so pure it felt like medicine. I looked around at the mismatched circle of chairs, Denise in her apron, Tom in his paint-stained jeans, Mark holding his wine glass with 2 fingers, and Zoe curled under a blanket between them all, and realized I had everything I once thought I'd never have. No marble floors, no chandeliers, no cold approval masked as love. Just presence. Mark squeezed my hand. "You okay?" I nodded. "Better than okay. Still thinking about the suitcase?" "Not really," I said, and meant it. "They'll spend that money. It'll disappear, like everything they built." "And us?" I looked toward Zoe, now fast asleep on Tom's shoulder. "We'll keep growing." We sat in silence as the fire crackled low. The next morning, Zoe came into my room holding a picture she had drawn. 5 stick figures stood hand in hand beneath a bright sun. Me, Mark, herself, Denise, Tom. The word family was written in large, careful letters above them. She pointed to the drawing and asked, "Can I hang this on the fridge?" "Of course," I said, brushing her hair back. "It's perfect." That afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. From my mother. Handwritten. The handwriting I used to memorize on birthday cards before I knew how little they meant. It was a single page, carefully folded, beginning with "Dear Emily," and ending with, "We hope to rebuild one day." I didn't finish reading it. I burned it in the fire pit that night. Not out of anger, but because the past doesn't deserve a frame. Zoe had already drawn the new one, and it was enough. That night, before bed, I sat at my desk and opened her journal. I wrote, "Real family doesn't need permission to show up. They don't have to be asked. They never make you earn love. They just bring soup, plant trees, and build treasure hunts on tired knees. Then I closed the book, turned out the light, and walked down the hallway where laughter still echoed faintly from the day before. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had anything left to prove. The morning the article hit the national press, I didn't even know. I was too busy helping Zoe pack for her weekend art retreat. She was 9 now, taller, steadier, the small roundness in her cheeks slowly giving way to the fine angles of her father's face. She carefully folded her sketchbooks and tucked them into her backpack alongside a pencil case Denise had monogrammed with gold thread. When I asked if she was nervous, she shook her head and said, "I already know who I am." That stayed with me. It wasn't until I returned to the office that my assistant rushed in with her phone. "You need to see this." A national magazine had reprinted the original interview with updates highlighting the foundation's work, the healthcare initiatives, the design studio's rapid expansion. The article featured a new pull quote at the top, in bold black font. "They left me to burn, so I built something from the ashes." That sentence wasn't something I had scripted. I said it quietly at the end of the original interview, almost as an afterthought, but now it was everywhere. The calls started that afternoon. Media outlets, podcasts, TEDx, even a morning show segment. One producer said the country needed more stories like "Minna resilience without rage, revenge without cruelty." I didn't correct her. I wasn't sure if what I'd done qualified as revenge. Not exactly. I never wanted them ruined. I only wanted to be free of the weight they had pressed onto me my whole life. That same week, a business newsletter announced that Palmer Furnishings had filed for bankruptcy. A friend in real estate forwarded me the listing photos of their former home, now staged and stripped. Marble floors, bare, chandeliers cold. The caption read, "Estate sale, motivated sellers." I didn't open the link. Then came the final voicemail. My father's voice was thin. A man who had finally accepted he no longer commanded rooms. "Emily, if there's anything left between us, anything you can give." He trailed off, as if he had forgotten what he meant to say. I deleted the message without hesitation. People assume revenge is dramatic, loud, a courtroom, a confrontation, a door slammed in someone's face. But this wasn't that. This was quieter, more permanent. A series of absences, a set of decisions. No reunions, no reconciliations. I never said I forgive you, and I never will. Not because I'm angry, because I'm not interested. And that, I've come to understand, is the purest kind of freedom. Months later, I stood in front of a room full of employees at our annual company retreat. 62 people, most of them parents, all of them beneficiaries of the system we built. Fair wages, full health care from day one, flexible hours, and no unpaid overtime. I told them how we started me at a kitchen table, Zoe recovering in the next room, Mark juggling work and hospital visits, Tom and Denise delivering dinner and belief. I didn't mention my parents. I didn't need to. Every success was already an answer to their absence. After the applause, I walked outside to the small garden we'd planted beside the new Seattle office. Zoe was waiting for me there, sitting beside Denise on the bench Tom had built from salvaged pine. She waved me over. I sat between them. Zoe leaned her head on my shoulder. "Remember when I was sick?" she asked softly. "I always will." "I don't think about it much now," she said. "Just sometimes, when I feel the scar, does it hurt?" She shook her head. "Number, it just reminds me I made it." So did I. That evening, as the sun sank behind the city skyline, I found myself back in my own living room, surrounded by a life they said I would never build. Mark brought me tea, still hot. Zoe practiced scales on her piano. Tom was reading in the corner, Denise sewing beside him. None of us said much. We didn't need to. Later, I sat alone at my desk and opened the last page of Zoe's life journal. I wrote carefully. "This isn't a story about being wronged. It's a story about remembering who showed up. who loved, who stayed. I didn't win anything. I built something. That is not revenge. That is release. I closed the journal. In the hallway, Zoe was laughing at something Mark said. Her voice echoed down the hall like music, free and full and untouched by the silence that used to surround me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. Not even myself. Because peace doesn't arrive with closure. It arrives when you stop asking for it. It arrives when you choose something better than their love, your own, and the kind that never needed to be earned. Sometimes the most powerful thing you'll ever do is walk away without a sound. Not to punish, not to prove, but to protect the part of you that finally stopped begging to be seen. This story wasn't about revenge. It was about a woman who stopped knocking on doors that never opened with love. About building something lasting from the pieces others left behind. If you've ever been the one left out, overlooked, told you were too much or not enough, but kept going anyway, then this story is also yours. Have you ever walked away quietly and found your strength on the other side? Comment 1 if you understand that kind of silence. Comment 2 if your journey looked different, but your power was the same. You're not alone, and you never were. We'll read every word you share, because quiet strength deserves to be heard at last.